Keys to the Commonwealth, a podcast where we share the real stories of local community members who are using real estate to build personal wealth, along with tips and tricks from professionals across the industry. And now, your host, Landry Fields.
Welcome back to another episode of the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. I'm excited today to have Dillon Leonard on the podcast. I've seen his name floating around, recommended for some different scenarios on a topic we've not covered yet on the podcast, and what he does with his investment group and business. So from originally, and still is from Oldham County here in Kentucky, over towards the Louisville area of the state. But before we get into that, Dillon, thanks for coming on the show, man.
No, I really appreciate you having me. It's always good to kind of talk about real estate investing. Yeah. I feel knowledge is power, and that, you know, when we share kind of with each other different sectors and stuff, we can really kind of hone in on strategy.
I mean, the reason I started this podcast on honesty, and I didn't know and wanted to hopefully give back to people and show them more or less ways they could knowledge is power and invest, and hopefully get the strength or courage to kind of take a step of faith in their own, like this type of thing, like me, I did, 18, 19 months ago. And man, that was a terrifying step when I first got into it, if I'm being honest, type of scenario. But you're like, trusted the process, trusted like the people I talked to, trusted the things I was learning through the videos and podcasts. And was like, I know this is going to, if I can at least, now I've learned enough to take those first steps, I was like, this is definitely going to work if I do it from the right way. Type of scenario.
Oh, I totally agree. Kind of for me, as my journey has gone on, I've really kind of learned the who, not how approach. I've kind of tried to get close to people that I know are industry leaders in a certain sector that I've been interested in, and just get in front of them, buy them coffee or lunch so I can learn. But I share the same value. Side note, I work for a local fire department. I've been there for 7 years. Yeah. And the first responder community, a lot of them have the opportunity because of our scheduling to do these kind of things off, their days, but they don't have that kind of knowledge. So I've been a liaison or resource there for the fire department to teach a lot of guys, about these kind of strategies too. So, they can kind of look at building generational wealth as well.
There's a lot of ways to do that or invest outside of just, the traditional model we were probably taught as kids, just save with your 401k or whatever type of scenario. And
I agree.
With inflation and those types of things really kind of starting to outweigh and outpace those traditional returns, I was like, there's got to be some other ways and factors. And I still have those investments, obviously, but it's like, I want to start diversifying and not just throw all my marbles in one basket kind of scenario.
They do a good job of making sure that you stay invested in the market. There's some pretty heavy penalties if you do pull your money out, but I think real estate, anytime that you give your money to somebody else to invest, especially in stocks, I mean, it can have its benefits, but real estate gives you a unique opportunity where you have leverage and also the opportunity to control the asset. And I think anytime that you can kind of get in a space where you have control and especially with storage, kind of lesser regulation versus like residential rentals and stuff like that, it gives you a large opportunity to kind of expand on the concept.
Yeah. Before we kind of head down any more path here on our conversation, a little bit back about your background, hop back in the door and tell me, who you are, how you got into the business of investing, and what we will kind of dive into, which is now the rental storage unit type of space and so forth. So
I'll kind of, it is a long story, so I'll try to give you the cliff notes on it. More or less, I've been kind of a natural born entrepreneur, and that's kind of really a lie, I guess, to say. I don't feel like anybody is, but there might be something in your life that catches you and kind of leads you down, that path. Way background, my father was a firefighter, and my mother's family owned a florist on Dixie Highway. Yeah. So I grew up between the firehouse and a small business. So now what I do is firehouse and small business, and I really learned a love for sales. I mean, early on, to the point that I was the kid that kind of walked around and sold gumballs and stickers to other kids in the neighborhood, and really all the way back, that started with my very first business when I was in high school. I started actually detailing cars, and long story short, that turned into flipping cars. Flipping cars turned into building up enough money I could eventually flip a house. My first house I actually flipped was on Home Street in Frankfurt, which, if you're familiar with the area, is...
I'm getting familiar. I'm starting to, I guess, some investments happen.
It's a rougher area.
Yeah.
Which I feel like a lot of people start off in the C and D properties because they look appealing on paper. The operations are a little different, but kind of went down that route. I didn't really like it. It was a lot of crime in the area. More or less, I decided to sell that. Took the money from that and really did almost like a hotel on it. I pocketed about $5,000 off that first one after about a month of losing sleep and trying to figure out what the heck I was doing. And I actually went down the wholesale path for a little while.
Really? Okay.
For about 2 years. And I probably sold about 24 properties. I started specializing towards the end of that in small multifamily 3 and 4 plexes, at which point I finally built up enough money again that I started doing the same, which is small 4 plexes in downtown Louisville. I was spending a lot of time there. At one point, I had 3 4-plexes, and then about February of 2020, during an ice storm, I had a fire in one of our buildings, and I called the company that responded to it because I knew guys on it. And they told me, yeah, man, this is really bad. You probably need to get down here. So drove down there. And that day, I remember, I think on my time hop on Facebook, the day after, I posted, who knows something about self-storage, because I was just determined at that point, I was like, I want to go towards an asset class where people can't live in. And that's not entirely true today. We do own one property right now that's mixed use that has residential space. But that kind of was the catalyst that got me looking into commercial self-storage. I bought my first property, I want to say it was October of that year, 2020. And fast forward to today, I'm kind of, one of the bigger, small growing companies here in Kentucky when it comes to self-storage. But companies Simpli Stored Self-Storage. We currently have 4 locations, just over 580 doors and about 80,000 square foot of storage. So that's kind of where we sit at today. And that really was a journey from 2020, late 2020 till now. So we've really kind of snowballed into it. Really kind of try to hit it head on. So
interesting.
That's a 10,000 foot view.
And before, I don't want to gloss over the beginning of your story there, actually, in that sense of like almost like the Gary Vee type of thing of like, starting off small and taking this, and then you're able to kind of leverage this and invest into this and then grow that. A lot of people like to say the entrepreneurial game, like, it's like they make it very sexy sounding or appealing or looking, and you're like, it's just a grind. I really, at the end of the day, like, if you're an entrepreneur, that just means I think you enjoy the grind more than most people type of scenario.
I agree you bring attention to that, because I did really kind of gloss over that. In the beginning, I did anything I could to turn a profit. And I describe my story as kind of a domino effect. In the beginning, it was a lot of small dominoes. And nowadays, it's not as many dominoes, but we're getting to knock over those larger and larger dominoes. And I felt like part of that is as you grow in your investing journey and you kind of get your feet under you as an entrepreneur, you start having faith in the idea of, putting a lot of time into one thing that might pan out big. Whereas in the beginning, you're looking for little scraps, whatever you can do just to kind of get to the next step. And as you grow kind of in the industry and as the space, you kind of build up faith in yourself to take those bigger steps. But,
and to marry that with what you're talking about with the knowledge is power type of scenario, like the only way to learn some of this stuff most of the time is just by getting in there and doing it and taking those steps. And there's no real way just to skip ahead of that a lot of times, unless you were already in it to begin with, or someone coached you to begin with, kind of a scenario.
I agree. And the other thing to say about that is those that do have large pools of capital or somebody who backs them that they don't necessarily say, and they're an overnight success per se, a lot of times will fail or lose everything because they don't have the street smarts that got them up to that. I mean, I built a lot of my sales skills and customer service skills by failing constantly. And I have to say that's always been my biggest thing. To me, a biggest trait as an entrepreneur that can lead to success is not the fear of failure. And when you do fail, don't see it as failure, just see it as a learning opportunity. Pick yourself up and try the next thing. The only way you really fail is when you give up. I mean, if you see everything as a learning opportunity to get to the next step, I mean, that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and I'm still growing as a boss, and sometimes obviously, and that's a whole nother thing. I don't know if you've got staff yourself type of scenario, but just leading them and realizing, you know what, guys, I haven't been what you needed me to be lately, or et cetera. And that was kind of brought to some attention where I was maybe distracted in some other areas with some different business stuff. And you're like, at least having the humble kind of a self observance of being able to say, yeah, you're right about that type of scenario goes a long way. And I do need to take a look and not just sit here and think I got it all together.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So I have a hard term with the idea of being a boss. I just don't see myself in that light, and it's very difficult for me to sometimes understand that that's the role I have to take.
Yeah.
I see our group of what I have is kind of a team, and that's why I tell them. I tell them if you fail at anything, it's because I haven't coached you properly. So I take complete accountability for our business, and I am very humbled and open with them sometimes. Here recently, we've just had a lot of projects going on, and I've been stretched, just razor thin, and I've just had to tell them a couple of days. I've realized I've been a little snappy, not mean, but just snappy. And I'll call them back later. Send them a message, be like, "Hey, look, I just want you to know, we got a lot going on. I truly appreciate everything you do. It's just I've got a lot of things. So if I sound short, I'm running 4 different directions at one way.
No, totally. And there's a fine balance I think I'm learning with you got all on your plate and offloading things off your plate, but because it's kind of like your baby, your project, your business, etc., that it's real easy to also on the flip side of that seesaw kind of thing, like also try to micromanage because you're kind of worried at the same time and learning to really just say, hey, I'm going to trust you in this, and I do trust you in this type of scenario. But hopefully those expectations, processes, and things like that have been kind of set up to begin with, so you can kind of fall back on them, that type of thing as well.
I think you're completely right. I feel like the hardest part of being an entrepreneur in a lot of ways is promoting yourself. I mean, like if you are, like in a corporate setting, like everybody's like climb. But I mean, there's days I go and swing hammers, or the other day I dug a hole, for some concrete work we were doing, and had to cut out a gas line because I knew concrete was coming the next day. So I mean, it's very difficult acting sometimes at a high level, but understanding too, you have to fill in the gaps being the leader of your company.
Yeah.
And I like to kind of lead, from the front lines too. I like all the people that work with us to know that, I do the trainings and I show them how to do it, and I'll get out and go on field days and stuff with them to make sure things are getting done and talk about design details, because I want them, I never want to be seen as this high and mighty figure in my business. I like to be considered our team leader, but I try to set up a common goal, so we're all working towards it. Yeah, and I'm probably the lowest paid person in my company. I'll say that. I reinvest everything at this point just because I do have a W-2. So there's a lot of,
there's a lot of value when, I think the other part of the entrepreneur is that I think maybe what comes easy is to see the long-term goal rather than just the short-term kind of scenario.
I agree. Looking back on it now, my real estate journey really, including flips and wholesale and everything, is about 5 years, and I'm 27. Well, actually, it's probably closer to 7 years, honestly. I bought my first rental house, which was the one in Frankfurt, right around my 21st birthday. So, I mean, like looking back on it now.
So what made you want to get into it like early on at such a young age?
Yeah, I mean, I had a background flipping, cars and that kind of thing.
Right.
And what I always did,
natural transition in some respects.
In some respects, but what I did is I kind of sat with myself and I said, I want to follow the money. Who is the wealthiest person I know, and what are they doing? And the 3 things I've always been told that from the top to the bottom, people spend the most money on is 1, actually retirement. For most people, if they're stocking something away, that's the most money they ever put anything. So like for stockbrokers, investors, 2 is housing, and 3 is usually cars. So I did cars and housing, and I actually went to school to be a financial advisor. But I actually transitioned to going towards fire science within my, it was my first year, just because I started to learn a little bit more about the industry. And there's been so many technological advances when it comes to like the ETF funds and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I didn't want to, it was kind of a moral thing, and nothing against stockbrokers. Some people need this kind of guidance. I personally didn't. But, collecting 1 to 3% of somebody's entire life savings for something I felt like you and I could sit down and I could set you up a target fund in 15 minutes that would work your entire life, I couldn't sleep with, and that's what I do for a lot of guys in the fire department is I'll sit with them and we'll talk about investing, and mainly Ross and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'll teach them about target funds, and we'll get them set up in something like that.
Nice.
So, I mean, I've got a well-rounded approach.
Yeah, I get it. So switching over to kind of the rental space with the self-storage and so forth. What does that look like? Obviously, I've seen a lot of different videos about out there, the YouTube stuff and the people about that. Obviously, as me and you both probably know, there's a shortage of housing in America, kind of a scenario. And so probably that comes with that is that people are still acquiring stuff. And so I'm assuming that also marries with the fact that there's probably, I'm guessing, a shortage of self-storage units because of this scenario at the same time, and only seems to be growing. At first, I think for a few years, I was like, I feel like that that's probably not going to be growing or, maybe, but obviously I think I was definitely wrong in my initial maybe guess on that type of scenario. The more I've been educated and learned. So talk to me a little bit about that business as far as what you look for, different aspects of like cap rates, NOIs, go into much detail as you want, but what do you kind of look for? What's your kind of model in that sense?
I'll try to give it a 10,000 foot view because there's a lot of facets when it comes to storage. To start with, storage is actually a relatively young industry when it comes to retail storage, which is your smaller units that you're leasing to individuals versus companies. It actually started, in my understanding, either between Florida or Texas. There's some stipulation between that in the 70s. So it's a really young industry when it comes to retail storage. So when I say retail storage, what I'm talking about is like a 5x5 or a 10x10. We're talking about like the size of a room. We're not talking warehouses. So, I mean, when I say there's multiple facets, the first thing I try to always educate people on is that storage is actually a retail business with a underlying real estate asset to it.
Sure.
So we're front facing.
Makes sense.
We deal with customers. We're on a monthly basis, so it's almost like a subscription basis. The difference between us and some other businesses is that the real estate underneath it, of course, is based on a cap rate and valued on that, and it's not possible to operate the storage business without.
So that was one of the first questions I was going to ask. So it's not on like a lease type of scenario where there's a 3, 6, 12 month or whatever. It generally is just a month to month kind of scenario, subscription more or less model than contract.
The industry is 90%, I would estimate, month to month. Now, with that being said, the laws when it comes to storage versus residential like rentals is completely different.
Sure.
We fall under lien laws versus, like eviction law, which is, what your typical residentials are. And the reason being is that no one should be living in our structures. I say should because there's some stories there. But because no one lives there and you're just storing goods, more or less, and also not goods that people are going to probably be using on a day-to-day basis, the laws are different. So like our quote-unquote eviction process, what it takes for us to reclaim a unit is 45 days, and we don't have to go through a court system. We just have to go through a lien and documentation system because it's a different kind of asset, from that standpoint. So month to month is 90%, I would say, of the industry. You can do it anyway. Honestly, you could do it yearly. Not month to month is what the customer base particularly wants, with the exception of sometimes like boat and RV storage. That's kind of a different industry. I don't really get into a whole lot because the operation's a little different. But that's usually on a quarterly or biannually basis because, I mean, typically you're dealing with somebody who has an RV or a boat and they're only going to use it seasonally. And your customer base is different.
That's probably where I'm assuming you're not charging necessarily by space, but by the kind of more or less the item and the size of the item because you're more just parking it kind of a thing.
Everything in storage is kind of based on the enclosure and the square footage. So like a 10 by 10 can have two variations per se. It could have like a drive-up unit, which is your non-conditioned exterior. And then you can have drive-up conditioned, where it's air conditioned but drive up. And then you have like your warehouse style, which is your larger ones where it has multiple floors and like an elevator. So there's a couple different product variations there. When it comes to boat and RV, typically you have three kinds there too. Open parking, which is just parking like in a gravel field. Lean-to, which is where you just have a roof over it, but maybe not protection from sun exposure. And then you'll have something kind of like a full service, which is usually essentially a garage. It's enclosed. Some of these sites might even have like dumps for, like sewage systems and treatment, for like RVs or charging ports and stuff. I mean, there's kind of like a high, low, medium grade.
I think I've seen some of that where people had like more of these large garage systems for campers or boats or just secondary storage units for some office, contractor would rent it out or something like that. Almost like flex space, but it wasn't kind of.
There is another one called contractor suites, and that's relatively new, and it's kind of in between warehousing and storage. And what they typically are about 1,000, 2,000 square foot spaces that might have a small front facing like office with a bathroom. And a lot of times they'll get rent out to small contractors, like you were saying, plumbers, electricians, auto detailers, small mechanics,
lawn companies, probably.
Lawn companies, that kind of stuff too. We have a lawn company that we work with that does an excellent job over here, actually in Nicholasville, Stevens Lawn Care, that takes in they manage our facilities and they lease one of our yards there, and we have small contractors and stuff there as well. But I mean, really, storage for the most part, as long as you call it a storage unit, is really unlimited to what you can do with it. In some markets, as far as like even California, where they have ungodly amounts of money, it appears, there's specialty, storage where they even have some higher end will have a wine storage. You'll have your own little section and they'll just store wine bottles for you. There's record storage, cigar storage, art storage. So, I mean, there's some really way out there, more or less kind of storage concepts.
Gotcha. So, I mean, it's just whatever you can kind of almost dream of or think of, you could potentially do assuming the market demands it. And
that's exactly it. If you can identify a customer base. So what you were saying is, there's a lot of things getting popped up all over the place.
Yeah.
There's a couple ways to think about that. Housing trends, particularly have kind of been trending towards a smaller size in recent years. And especially as, interest rates and like housing costs, rise, builders are cutting corners with like basements and attic space and that kind of thing. And then you have to think about geographic things too, like in Florida or even like areas of Eastern Kentucky where we have some facilities, because of the housing, a lot of the housing doesn't have basements. They have a higher demand for storage as well.
Yeah.
So it can be very market driven. The national average, last I checked, of storage square foot per capita for every one person is 8 square foot per person within, a radius of the storage facility. I know that some markets are way above that. Like Nashville, I heard was in the 40s. I mean, it's insane.
Feet per person type
insane.
of thing?
Yes.
That's what the market was demanding for storage?
You got to think there's been a huge influx, and most of the housing that's getting built in downtown like Nashville is large multiplex, smaller living spaces. So what are people going to do with their extra stuff? And then another thing too is just consumers, as our kind of, society has changed the way we kind of do things. It's not buy, fix, keep forever. A lot of people are either storing mom and dad's stuff. There's a lot of actually transfer of wealth and just physical goods happening from older generations, that are passing away or passing things on that has to be stored, coupled with the fact that us as a society, we're buying more and more stuff and more or less having to have a place to put it. We're kind of becoming hoarders as we go on.
I thought we were moving away from hoardership in some respects with the more
yes and no,
like a minimalist kind of thing, but I could see.
So living trends have gone minimalist is what I'm realizing. The living trends, the smaller spaces and less to maintain when it comes to your house. But as far as your iPhone, your bikes, your physical goods, we tend to be trending higher on physical good, and smaller on living.
Interesting. Maybe taking out the high-low outliers, what is a kind of a typical length of time that you're kind of you kind of roughly have an idea and expectation of the market of how long that person with a subscription, how long they usually maybe like even last with you as far as a client goes?
There's a lot of control over that too. If I was to estimate, I would say 9 to 12 months. Now, some facilities, they retain customers for years.
Sure.
And the reason being is that a lot of mom and pop with your older kind of single locations, they don't keep up with trends and rising rates. They just want to pay the mortgage. And once it's paid off, they just kind of set it and forget it.
Yeah.
They'll keep their prices sometimes as low as 30% of the market value. I've seen it in units just to make sure that they don't, more or less what they're trying to offer is a lesser product, a lesser price, more or less. You might not be able to get a hold of them. They might send you bills, through mail, more or less, but they just want your very small amount of money, and they'll keep you for years.
From a transactional place, I mean, what does that look like from, I guess, the technology that's out there, leveraging that, from a manpower, I guess, and time and energy and management sake? Is it just you got one person that's there at all times kind of thing? Usually I know most of these places are very self-serve as far as getting in and out type of a thing.
Correct. So a lot of the big boom that's happened in storage has been due to technological increases.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the owner base, a lot of the people who own these facilities are an older population and are unwilling to adopt certain technological advances, which leaves a huge, more or less opportunity.
I've never heard of such a thing.
That's exactly what's happening. But just to say for storage, like I'll take just an example. One of our facilities, I have one in Williamsburg. When we bought it, it was pen and paper. I didn't have most of our customers when we took it over, about 90 units, other than their name. It was a small town and they knew everybody. I didn't have cell phone numbers. I didn't have anything. And the leases were not legal. I know that for sure. They ran this really, I don't know if they ever picked up, even a copy of what Kentucky lien law was for storage.
Really?
But that's what I target. And the reason I mean is like when I purchased that facility, they were doing everything there every day. If you got like late, they had to lock you out. And then once you got paid up, they had to come and unlock you.
Oh, wow.
And then the leases were done in paper. They collected everything in cash for some reasons we won't discuss too much. They were old school pen and paper, books were a mess. They couldn't tell me what was coming in and out, but I was able to kind of guesstimate. But what I knew was the market of where, the units needed to be.
Yeah.
So that's old school. The old school model is that they're hand signing leases, they're collecting cash, they're unlocking everything, and they're on call. If you want a unit, you call up Jim, and Jim comes down and unlocks the unit, shows you around. We take and implement a huge amount of technology, which is mainly because it's now available where it wasn't available, within the last 15 years. So if you rent a unit now at one of our locations, what it looks like is you pull up to the gate and there's a big sign, "Welcome to Simpli Stored. Here's our phone number. Call or text us. We have a text line, or visit us online to rent instantly." So you go on there, you fill out all your information, you give us a credit card, and then it instantly sends you all your notifications, whether or not it's 1 o'clock in the morning, anytime.
Yeah.
Our office is only open for calls, and we do customer interactions 10 to 2 Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Saturday. But you can rent a unit anytime. And as soon as you rent, it proofs all your information, charges your card, it takes and scans your driver's license. So we have all the information we need. You sign off, e-sign on your phone.
Yeah.
You get a text that says, "Welcome to Simpli Stored. Your gate code is this number. When you get to unit number 19, your code to open the door is this number."
So you're even doing digital codes as opposed to keys on the unit doors themselves.
We use a product that's called a Da Vinci lock. It's relatively new, but what it is, old school storage, if you were late, they had to throw a lock on your unit. It was a disc lock, and when you got paid up, you had to call them. They had to come unlock it.
So kind of like the boot on the car scenario.
I mean, that's exactly it, because we can lock people out, but it's very labor intensive. So one of the things that we did to alleviate that is we use a special kind of lock that has a 4-digit combination on. So when you get paid, we send you an email that says, "Hey, the code to unlock this is this." So the next time you're there, you can take that lock off. So that way we don't have to send somebody out there to do it. That cuts a huge amount of the operations.
Right.
So that's the front end for the customer. If the customer has any questions, they can go on their profile and make payments, do anything like that, or they can text or call us, and we'll get back with them more or less to kind of give them any direction. Most of them are newer customers. They don't really want the interaction.
It's
kind of like a big vending machine, and that's the way they see it. They want to pay their monthly part. They don't really want to have to talk to anybody.
They want to know but I from my experience, same thing in a lot of ways with insurance or whatnot, but they want to know they can still call you if there's something that did come up.
That's exactly, and that's why we have
marrying those two aspects together.
Yes. So we have about 500 customers over across our almost 600 units, and I would say on a daily basis, outside of like when billing cycles start, which is the 1st and the 5th when they get their first late fee, we probably have less than probably 10 points of contact a day, just between people trying to either text in or that kind of thing to get codes.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's kind of the model they're looking for. That's what the customer looks for. So that's why we can alleviate that end. The leasing is a huge part. And then operationally, each one of my sites, we have somebody that we hire who's a local maintenance guy, and he goes out and we call them task dates. So we roll all our billing due on the 1st, whereas older facilities might prorate when you move in, or not prorate where you're going to be due on a bunch of different days. We make everybody due on the 1st, late on the 6th, overlock on the 16th, and then the auction process starts on the 26th. And when I say the process, we have to mail them. It's not until about 45 to 60 days after they're completely delinquent.
So that kind of leads me into that one of those other questions. 2 questions I had with the contracts. First of all, from a contract perspective, I guess there's no real background checks and different things like this. It's more just like making sure you're good on credit wise or something like that, and that you're going to sign off that you're not doing anything illegal, or not storing anything illegal.
That's pretty much it.
And the other part of the question would be the aspect of the lien thing, like you're talking about with the auction stuff, and really what that is as far as what that entails. What's the process? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
In this?
So we'll kind of roughly run over that. So when it comes to the storage, there's not a whole lot you can do when it comes to like background checking, or anybody. I mean, there's in a lot of ways not a whole big need to.
I didn't think so.
There really isn't. Our facilities are plastered with cameras, so we keep an eye on things, and we have certain fail safes in place where like we keep a log. Our gate system communicates with our computer system. We can see when somebody's coming and going into the facility. If they're coming and going at weird hours of the night, multiple nights, it flags us and lets us know, hey, there's some weird activity here. And then
it's like continual suspicious activity. You're one-offs here and there, but
exactly. 5 days in a row they're coming in at 8 o'clock at night. They're not leaving till 6. It's kind of like, okay, why are they there overnight? So that's one of the fail safes we use. So we have to be more proactive when it comes to the security, part. But not to make this sound bad in any way, but 90% of our customer base is actually vetted by the fact that we require a driver's license to be scanned and a credit card. I don't want this to sound in any bad way, but a lot of times the people who can't provide us obviously a driver's license or say, hey, I only got cash to pay you. I'm not saying that's not a customer we'll take. It's a customer that we don't necessarily seek because, unfortunately, we see the highest amount of default either on unit costs or, anything like that associated with that.
Very similar to the insurance side of things, honestly, with, monoline auto scenarios that we try to stay away from those things. But yeah, sorry, back to the contract part, lien and the auction part.
So the contract's pretty fairly simple. It's a 30-day contract. It runs on a month-to-month basis. More or less, it kind of reads as a 30-day contract. You renew it or just let us know when you don't want to renew it anymore. We ask for a 10-day notice, more or less, so that we can close out the unit.
Okay.
From a lien process, the way it looks like is that we can charge, you're due on the 1st. We can't charge your first late fee until the 6th. We can't overlock you until you're 2 weeks behind, which is on the 16th day. We send the first letter, more or less, saying, hey, you're delinquent, if you intend to pay this, let us know. If you're moving out, let us know on the 16th. We have to send another one 2 weeks in advance of that, which we usually send them out around the 26th, just to say the same thing, more or less, hey, you're delinquent. This is a final notice. On the 45th day, your unit will have to go to auction. And then around the 30th day, we have to cut the lock, take the pictures, more or less, and we list them online. It's not like where you see like Storage Wars.
You're going to beat me to the
and you don't make any money. It's not like, you don't roll it up and it's like there's a Corvette in there. And also cars, there's a whole legality thing on there. But you don't roll it up and find like a stack of gold bars. It's usually a bunch of black plastic trash bags,
Clothes.
Yeah. So I'll clear the air on that. I don't like auctions. Yeah. We, as a storage business, are at the highest, what do you want to call it, risk of litigation, per se, whenever we sell somebody's stuff. And we don't make our money back. Whenever we go to auction, we're just trying to get a unit back. I've never made a profit on an auction. And we'll tell our customers that we don't want to sell anybody's stuff. All we're just trying to get is the monthly base. I don't even want late fees. I run everything on, if you pay your bills every month, that's how it goes.
Because usually that's always going to just cause headaches or problems.
It is. And we get the phone calls, that they called in and, it's rare. I would say 1 out of 10 customers are actually upset we sold their stuff. Most of the time they just drop off the face of the planet, but they're understanding, but we don't want to sell people's things, just the same as like in a residential rental. You don't want to send anybody out. It's just you need that unit back.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that process looks. And during that time too, I said 2 letters, but our system sends a lot of automated messages too. So they're going to get a message when their payment fails. They're going to get a message on the 6th, whenever they take and, are delinquent. They're going to get one on the 16th when they're locked out. And then they're going to get at least 2 more messages before the auction happens. So, you're talking about, we send, by the time that unit goes to auction, 2 physical letters, 5 emails, and at least 5 texts. So over a period of 2 months, we've tried to contact you, 12 times every 5 days, roughly, So
there's so much now where you can, like you said, you're documenting that, you can prove it all, you can show it all type of scenario.
And that's what you have to do.
So it's away from a lot of back end headaches.
That's it. So lien laws are different versus like the court system with an eviction, because with an eviction, you have to be seen by a judge. It has to be decided by a judge.
Yeah.
In the storage contract, there's a big block that says we have an active lien on your property. We can enforce this lien. And what a lien looks like is you sign off saying we have a lien.
When you say property, we're talking about the property, about the contents that are in the unit type of thing.
Correct. Okay. Yes. The contents. Yeah. So we have a lien against any of your contents. You certify that the contents are yours. You certify that they're lesser of a dollar amount of usually $2,000. That's really the cap of what we try to put, in a unit.
Yeah.
So you sign off on the lien. And then what happens is that you incur debt, more or less, by not paying your bill. That debt is held against the lien. And when it goes to an auction, whatever you owe us at that time is settled by the auction. If it goes over that, like say they owe us $400, and most of the time they owe us $400 to $500 by the time that it actually goes to auction. It's not a small amount. We're really holding off. You're talking about units $150 a month, so they're 2 to 3 months, behind at that point.
Yeah.
But the lien, whatever the auction proceeds are, settles what they owe us first. Anything that's left over that we have to hold for them to claim in 90 days. And I've never had in 3 years one person ever come to claim it. Most of the time they just abandon it. Yeah. I don't want to say some people rent units just to get rid of things, but it's kind of like some people, I feel like they rent a unit because they had an obligation to store somebody's stuff for them. Okay. And then they move everything in and they drop off the face of the planet. They did their part, and then we're left with a unit full of stuff we've got to get rid of. Wow. It's unfortunate, but it's part of the business. We don't have clogged toilets and 12 o'clock, middle of the night flood runs, that kind of stuff for the most part. We do have units every now and then that get abandoned. We have to clean up a mess.
Yeah. That's interesting stuff, man. I like I said, I knew decent amount to know I didn't know enough about it. And it's like trying to, wanted to have somebody on to kind of talk more about it type of scenario. And that's really cool that you've been doing that. So, I mean, you're up to 4 different units, or 4 different locations, I think you said.
We do. So I focus on the entire state of Kentucky.
Yeah.
The reason being is that the lien laws that we were just discussing are different from state to state.
Okay.
Cross into Indiana, your lien process goes from 45 days to 90 days instantly. Okay. And there was a time when I was looking at all over, more or less the nation, pretty much south of Kentucky. I've looked at properties in West Virginia, properties in Florida, properties in Alabama, Mississippi. But with each area that we kind of investigate, there's different kind of rules that you have to watch out for. Florida, I thought I had an incredible deal on. I mean, the lot alone was probably worth a lot, when we were looking back on it now.
Yeah.
But hurricane codes.
Yeah.
When we looked at it, the roofs need to be replaced, and it went from $25 square foot repair to they saying, hey, if you do anything to these roofs, they have to be completely ripped off and put in with like a hurricane system. You might as well tear them down and start over.
Gotcha.
Blew it up.
Oh, man.
Whereas in Kentucky, for the most part, our building codes are reasonable, and our state is very good in the point that our property taxes and our taxes and insurance are pretty standard across the board.
Yeah.
So I can take any property in the state and underwrite it probably within an hour or less and know if it's going to pencil. Whereas if I go into any other city, there might be, or not city, but state, there might be different taxes or different, structures of taxes, codes that I'm not aware of that could prohibit us from crossing lines.
Right.
And just operationally too, like I have a model where I can buy a property anywhere in the state and within probably 45 to 60 days have it brought up to our operational standard. Whereas if I was to buy one in Indiana, I would have to create a whole new team just to handle the lien process because it's a different process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I think I read this one time. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you would know. I'm pretty sure I read one time that the wealthiest individual in the state of Kentucky, some lady, I believe, and like her or her family, the wealth was generated because of storage units. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And I can't remember if she inherited or who the original originator of that was, but one of the I guess royal storage families, if you want to say that, really kind of boomed everything, started in Kentucky. Yeah. And I think they built the whole thing on cash, honestly.
Which is what, like, when you would go and like think, okay, wealthiest person in Kentucky.
Oh, yeah.
How would they, you're trying to rack your brain as far as, I mean, I'm sure that's well at the bottom of everyone's list that they would try to guess as far as that. Well, how it was built.
They kind of had a blessing and a curse. In a lot of ways, they built their portfolio on cash because up until probably in the last 10 years, banks didn't like self-storage. They didn't understand the asset and was too young to proof.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of it.
It is. Financing on self-storage has actually kind of proven itself partially in a lot of ways through COVID, but the last couple economic cycles.
Interesting.
You have to think about your customer base when it comes to storage. Boat and RV customers, they have enough money to buy a $150,000 boat and RV. Yeah. They're not going to miss $45 a month and let that thing go get auctioned off, for a couple $100. They just won't. It's so that's a different customer base there. Retail storage, what I do, has two kind of customers. And unfortunately, the two kind of customers I really have, well, I guess you could say three. On the lower side of the spectrum are people who are getting evicted most of the time, and they have to move quick. Two, just people moving from city to city, transient more or less.
Yeah.
And three would be people who are storing mom and dad stuff. Yeah. Once again, that's kind of our three customer base. So we have more turnover in retail storage versus boat and RV. But I mean, I kind of got a little off track there.
No. And there's one part of this from selfish from my, my other part of my day job being the insurance side of things. Because the nice thing is you're not really taking on the responsibility of people's stuff in this sense, as far as insuring it or anything like that.
Correct.
Because most people, there's a factor of their home insurance policy or whatnot that gives them coverage for stuff that's stored off site up to a certain amount or whatnot. So that's which is an awesome part of it, because that even alleviates anything from you as the owner of the units and stuff like that. Is there, though, like secondary aspects that are presented as options for kind of like, a type of insurance on their stuff that's separate, just a standalone kind of a thing?
There is. You can get private.
Most people don't do it, I'm assuming.
Most people don't. But we do. We offer it. So there are third-party companies where you can obtain it by yourself. But There is. Now, we work through a third party to offer it as well, and they handle everything.
Right.
We get a percentage of their premiums. Exactly. And we don't have to deal with the claim process, other than our documentation for the facility, which is nice. But I mean, it is a good product to have because if you read a storage lease, really, we don't guarantee contents. We're just providing a space to put your stuff. And that's the reason we encourage people to, wrap certain fabric items in plastics or use plastic totes.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. We'll have some people who, will move things in cardboard boxes and blankets thrown up on top of things. And then 6 months later, they want to come in and tell us, hey, our unit got infested with mice or there's a mouse nest in there. And, we try to encourage people to store properly. But, I mean, you have to understand, too, you have to think of it as if you were to put a blanket in the corner of your garage outside and leave it alone for 6 months.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of our areas are rural, and even in cities, stuff like that does happen.
Yeah.
But we offer insurance against that.
I was thinking there had to be some
we
aspects of that type of scenario.
We do. I mean, it starts with education. We try to educate people how to properly store things, and we, of course, outline everything. Everything's in our lease. We have instructionals on how to do this. It's like when you accept the terms and conditions on your iPhone, I mean, it's there. A lot of people don't read it.
You wait, what? It's listening to everything I'm saying, including this podcast.
I'm not, but they are. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
To wrap it up, though, I mean, kind of been born and raised in Kentucky. Then, in that sense, so like, what's one of your favorite kind of things? If someone was kind of talking to you about Kentucky, that you're like, hey, this is why I love Kentucky, or this certain thing is what I love about Kentucky.
As a first responder, I've seen facets of everything, more or less for the state. I will say Kentucky, the majority of Kentucky feels like a small town.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would say. There's areas of Kentucky, especially when you get into like Eastern Kentucky and stuff, that have their own separate culture, and I feel like Kentuckians is overall, we're all kind of small town, even in Lexington, Nicholasville, these kind of areas, everybody knows everyone. And I feel like that sense of community is something that kind of makes us different than a lot of areas.
Pretty sure I read one from a study like a year ago or some one of these like poll things that we were like rated the nicest. State in the union. I was like, yeah, I could believe that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes a big difference, It really does. Just, I feel like as a state, overall, everybody tries to work with each other, and I mean, no community is ever perfect, but I feel like overall, Kentucky still has a small town feel. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Appreciate your time, and we will see everybody back here on next week's episode of the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. Thanks again, man.
Thanks for having me.
To learn more about this podcast, visit our page at keystothecommonwealth.com. To connect with Landry regarding insuring your investment portfolio, email Landry at novainsuranceGroup.com or call 859-687-2004.